Over our questions for Revelation chapter 20 and do a little review of that with one of our pages. We'll get to that in just a minute, and then we'll move on. Let's discuss Revelation chapter 20. So this chapter will discuss the start of the millennial kingdom ruled by Jesus Christ. 6 times we are told that this kingdom will last 1,000 years. Do you remember us talking about the fact that there are some religions that do not look at this as a literal 1,000 years? Who can remember what they see it as? Do you remember? Not a literal 1,000 years, but an unspecified amount of time. Good for you. All right. So they just look at it as an age where it is, and oftentimes they see us living in that time period now, as weird as that seems. So when you get out there, if you're ever having a discussion with someone and you talk about the 1,000-year millennial kingdom and they look at you puzzled eyes, recognize that not every church and not every denomination sees this time period as a literal 1,000 years of a kingdom, a literal kingdom ruled by Jesus Christ from the throne of David in the literal city of Jerusalem. They do not see it. They have created every one of those areas along the way is looked at and viewed in some unspecific way. I very firmly believe that this is a literal time period because the Old Testament promises this time period dozens of times. Dozens of times God tells his people that this time is going to be allotted. And so just as every other time has been fulfilled, we expect this time to be fulfilled. All right, number 2, the angel that is mentioned in the opening verses performs an incredible task. What is it? What does he do?
He has the key to the bottomless pit.
Okay.
He chains up the dragon.
Okay. Okay, key to the bottomless pit. We've talked about that bottomless pit where the demonic host is held. Oftentimes, it is not the lake of fire. It is not the final destination for anyone, including Satan, but it is the holding place for demonic spirits, and it is the place where Satan will be held. We talked about the fact that this is not this is not a specific angel. The name is not given. It's not Jesus Christ himself. It's just an angel. An angel tasked with the job of chaining Satan and putting him into the bottomless pit. I think that's remarkable because it just tells you that it's almost like it's not a big deal. You know, an angel comes down, chains him up, puts him in the bottomless pit, and even does what? Seals it. Similar, an imitation of what happened with Jesus Christ, right? And so seals it. Now, of course, with Jesus Christ, that was opened. This one is closed for that period of time. So how long is he going to be there? Okay, that 1,000-year time period, Satan is going to be chained and held in the bottomless pit. Let's just for a second stop and remember something has been done previous to this before the millennial kingdom at the end of the 7 years to the Antichrist and the false prophet. What was that? Do you remember? Where is the Antichrist and the false prophet right now while this is being done? In the lake of fire. So the Antichrist and the false prophet were thrown into the lake of fire, the final destination. They're not being held for any reason. It was decided and they were done away with and put into the lake of fire. But that's not happening with Satan. Remember? So that's an interesting thing because God is not done using him at this purpose yet. There's the important part of that question. Why is he placed into the bottomless pit?
So he couldn't deceive the nations anymore.
So he couldn't deceive the nations anymore. So we talked last time about the fact that how interesting is that? Because what that tells us is that at any time God could have stopped Satan in his deceiving of the nations. At any time. we forget sometimes, we think that God and Satan are equals, opposite equals, good and evil, as if they're 50-50, as if it's going on. And that's not at all the way that it is. Because God has always allowed Satan to do what Satan does, but God allows it to fulfill his purposes. We're going to see a little bit of that in our study today. It's not a 50-50, who's going to win? Oh boy, this is really exciting. This is God simply allowing him to do that. And so at this point, it is God's will that Satan be bound for 1,000 years so that he cannot deceive the nations, because God has another plan for that 1,000-year period. Something else that's going to be occurring here. We're going to be talking about that. Number 4, believers in Christ and those who did not take the mark of the beast during the tribulation will live and reign. That's in verse 4, if you couldn't find that one. Live and reign with Jesus Christ during the kingdom period. So that's who will be there during that millennial kingdom period. What about the unbelievers throughout the history of mankind? What happens to them during the kingdom period? This is a little bit of a trick question. Think about it. Okay, what happens to unbelievers during the millennial kingdom?
They still have to decide if they're going to follow Christ or...
Well, let me clarify my question. Unbelievers throughout all of history, so they have died.
They stay dead until the end of the millennium.
Okay, someone over here said something? They stay. Okay, so unbelievers throughout all of history, starting at the beginning, the first man, until the last, unbelievers are not part of this 1,000-year time period. All right, so they have no participation in it. What is interesting is the fact that they are not even brought out of the place where they are being held. So there's a couple of different beliefs on that. Some people believe that they go into Hades, the holding place that was always the holding place, Sheol, the place where all the dead at one point went to. Some people believe in something called soul sleep. Have you ever heard that? It means that when you die, if you do not go into the presence of the Lord, you simply sleep in the earth until the resurrected body. So there's just no activity that goes on for unbelievers. There's different beliefs about that. What we know is that for that 1,000-year time period, unbelievers do not have any part in that, and they are not dealt with. They're simply not dealt with at this time. So they are going to stay wherever it is that they immediately go after they die. And then we're going to answer that what happens then in just a moment. In excuse me, 5, John will go forward in time during this vision and see a surprising event that will happen at the end of the millennial kingdom. I think it's so interesting that God continues to show him different time periods. What's going to happen right after the millennial kingdom starts, what happens during the millennial kingdom, what happens after the millennial kingdom. And John is trying to keep some sort of a little bit of a timeline on when this is all going to be happening. So a surprising event is going to happen at the end of the millennial kingdom. What is that?
Satan will be released.
Okay, Satan will be released. That is certainly surprising. What happens? So he goes out. Why was he put into the bottomless pit? So that he would not deceive the nations. What does he do the minute he's released? He deceives the nations. He obviously has not learned anything. And so he goes out, deceives the nations, brings them all into a battle. What is the battle called? Nope. Armageddon was at the end of the tribulation. It's called Gog and Magog, right? And so that's an interesting thing, and I gave you some information last week if you had a chance, or I keep saying last week, but you know I mean last class. I gave you some information on the Gog and Magog, and our question 6 says, this has similarities to another event in Old Testament history. Which one?
Gog and Magog and Ezekiel.
Okay, so the Gog and Magog battle of Ezekiel 38 and 39. And so we talked about the fact that oftentimes a name is given to something and then that same name is used again when the circumstances are very similar. And so in Ezekiel 38 and 39, nations come against Israel. We believe that it's probably Russia and some of the countries that surround Russia come down against Israel, and there is a battle that occurs there in Ezekiel 38 and 39, and God gives the battle to Israel. And so because it is very similar events are happening at the end, it's called the Battle of Gog and Magog. And what the way that I tried to explain that was I said, so if oftentimes we'll say, oh, a person is a Judas. Well, their name isn't actually Judas, but they have similarities of what Judas did. They're a deceiver or a betrayer, or they have the similarities, so we say, oh, he's a Judas. That doesn't mean that he is, but he has all those characteristics. Or she's a Jezebel. It doesn't mean that she is, but she has those characteristics. The Gog and Magog is the same thing. It has the characteristics of the Gog and Magog battle that happened before. Just as a side note, remember I told you we believe that Gog is probably not a proper name, but a title. Just like king or emperor or any of those things. Gog is very likely a title, so it doesn't need to be the same person. It needs to be the leader of the land of Magog. And Magog is described in Genesis. It's an actual literal territorial place. Magog was the either great-grandson or grandson of Noah, so in that time period there. All right, how will God handle the new rebellion? This thing that happens after the millennial kingdom, Satan comes out, he deceives the nation, there's a big gathering of people, and how does God handle it?
Devours them with fire.
He sends down fire and consumes them.
Okay, and it's like one sentence, right? He sends down fire and he consumes them. He devours them, that's it. It's not really a battle, right? He just sends down fire, consumes them, devours them, and that's the end of that one. So how is it possible that after 1,000 years of living under the rule of Jesus Christ in a near perfect environment, so we're talking about the millennial kingdom, that people would even choose to rebel? What does that say about human beings and their nature? So we talked about the fact that during that 1,000-year time period, it is an amazingly wonderful time period where Jesus Christ rules and reigns, and there is a near perfect scenario going on in the planet, and that there are people there in mortal bodies that came after the tribulation, and they are reproducing, and so there are people being born during this time. Now, the question is, why would anyone not follow the rule and reign of Jesus Christ during this time?
As we are sinful.
Narcissistic?
Yeah, think they're above God, don't need him.
Think they're above God, don't need him. Other comments?
Still have a sin nature.
Excellent. That sin nature that's in us. Anyone else?
Free will from God.
Free will given to us. Everyone likes their freedom until it lands them in jail or hell. And so then it's too late, right? I'm so sorry. These cottonwoods that have white stuff floating everywhere are killing me. Satan has deceived them again, but only at the end of the 1,000 years. So they have 1,000 years without Satan, and that's really important to remember, because a lot of times people like to point to Satan and say he's the cause of all sin. He's the reason. It's his deception. It's his fault that we are where we are. But actually, that's not true. He provides the temptation, right? He provides the temptation, but we have that sin nature. And we make the choice. We make the choice of what it is that we're going to do. So even during this 1,000-year time period, we make the choice. People will make the choice whether they decide for or against. Patty?
It just sounds like
you now, so to speak.
So there's a scripture, in fact, it's in your packet today, you'll see it, where it says that a man who lives to be 100 will be considered a child. All right, so what we primarily believe is that this is going to go back to the time spans of the time of Noah. Remember when people lived 700-800 years? So very likely the people who were born during this time will live in that time where they have the long spans, and someone 100 years old is considered to be a child. Okay, so what it tells us then is that our sin nature is prevalent. We don't need to have a Satan to tempt us. We're good at failing all on our own. And we forget sometimes that all the blessing comes from God and that we can do it. Now, while some people may serve God in the millennial kingdom, remember that God also knows the heart. Jesus Christ knows the heart. And if you're serving because you have to serve and you don't have a choice, that's different than serving out of love, right?
Kathy, in the millennial kingdom, we as believers, will we still have that stubborn streak and selfish and compromising?
Once we get into our glorified bodies, I don't believe so. I believe that once we are glorified and in our perfect bodies, then that we don't have that any longer. But the people who are living at that time, besides that, those in their glorified bodies have already made the choice. That's why you're in a glorified body. You're a believer. You've already made your decision. Every person who's ever lived has to make a decision. So those who are born during the millennial kingdom, they have to make a decision on what they're going to do. And so that decision's already been made by us. All right, 8, what is the white throne judgment? When does it happen and who will be involved? So we talked about multiple judgments, but what is the white throne judgment? Judgment of unbelievers. We've talked a little bit about that in an earlier question. When does this happen? After the 1,000 years is finished, the white throne judgment occurs. Who's there? Unbelievers only, or unbelievers only? Jesus is there. The judge is there also too. But unbelievers only. We are not part of that. People who are believers in Jesus Christ are not part of the white throne judgment. That is only for unbelievers. How will they be judged? According to their works. So do you think that's fair, and why or why not? Okay? And so why should they be judged by their works?
Because there are different levels in hell.
Okay.
I'm thinking.
Okay.
You know, the worst of the worst will
Okay.
go down with Satan and the false prophet.
Okay.
And, I mean, it's all torment, but
Okay.
Are these unbelievers dead or alive?
They're resurrected.
That's what I thought.
The earth brings them back. It says they come from the sea, they come from the grave, they come back, they return. So they are resurrected.
And they're facing their second death.
Yes.
Okay. That's where I get confused with them. Second death.
Yes.
And they'll have new bodies too?
I can't suck it while I'm talking. Thank you very much. She's offering me a little candy or a cough drop.
So the unbelievers will also have a new body, right?
What's that?
Unbelievers will also have a new body.
Yes, they will, because they have to be equipped to stay in hell for eternity. So yes, they will also be given a new body. So to be judged by their works is what they've chosen, right? So they've said, I should get into heaven because I've done this and I've done that and I've done this and I'm a good person and I've done this. And so it's all in the book. But is that how anyone is ever saved? Never. So all the good works that you could draw up are not enough to get you into heaven. These are people that are choosing their good works. They said, we don't need a savior because we're really good. We've done good things in our life. We're good people. We're certainly not as bad as that person is. And so they have chosen to be judged based on their works, thinking that their works are what's going to get them into heaven. And we know that that's certainly not possible. All right. So, what I'd like to do before we start chapter 21 is look in your packet that I gave you today. We can go ahead and close that out, and then we'll start this as our